I want to thank the teachers for all they do to help grow this wonderful future generation. These kids are priceless, and I feel good about our generation knowing that these are the ones that's going to be taking over. This morning's sermon, when we preach sermons, we want to make sure that it's a message that you can apply in your life. It's good to have head knowledge, and it's good to have heart knowledge. But unless we can apply what we've learned, it's not going to be life-changing knowledge. And the title of the sermon this morning is "To Listen is to Love." I've never heard someone say as a compliment, "Man, that's the most lousy listener I've ever been around. They're just not good at listening at all." I've never heard somebody say that. I have heard people say, "They're such a good listener." Because we all want to be listened to. We all have a story. But listening is something that we have to learn. It doesn't come natural. In my household growing up, I learned to listen quickly because if you didn't listen, there was a consequence to that. And so I learned to listen the first time. Some parents will give you 3, 4, 5, 6 times of telling the same thing. That didn't go in my household. It was said, you obeyed. I learned to listen. But then as I grew up, with friends and that kind of stuff, or teachers, you just kind of get in the habit of tuning somebody out. You see their mouth moving, but it's kind of like the Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. And then you're brought back to reality really quick when you hear your name called on, and they're like, "What was that answer?" And you're like, "Oh, I wasn't listening." And if we don't listen, sometimes it's just a discipline in school, but other times it can cost us our life if we're not listening. I've heard several sad, tragic stories about people having their GPS on with the auto part and not listening and finding themselves in a very bad, dangerous situation. God created us to be in relationships. In fact, if you read the Bible at all, it's relationship after relationship after relationship. He's all about the relationships. And how many of us, as we're older, know that to have somebody listen to you, that's a big deal. I've talked and counseled with so many women that will say, "Sorry, guys, but you seem to hold the crown on this one." They just don't listen. Or we have to listen with more than just our ears. You get that, right? Because a man can say, "How are you?" "I'm fine." Or they can say, "I'm fine." Same words. And if you're not careful, you'll walk out going, "Well, she said she was fine." Or a woman will be asking a husband that their friend is going through a lot, and they'll say, "Hey, so how is so-and-so?" "Well, he said he's fine." "Yeah, but how did he say it?" So it's more than just listening with our ears. We have to listen with our eyes. And then we also have to listen with our heart. So a good way for us to be able to start listening to God is to practice listening to one another. Because God speaks in different ways, and so you can't just listen with your ears. I wished I could. That would be so great if I could just hear his voice audibly say, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't doubt anything. But he doesn't do that very much with me. Sometimes it's a really strong thought. Sometimes it's a line from a song. Sometimes it's something that I've read. So we have to learn as believers to listen to God through every avenue that he might use. Everything in the Bible teaches us about relationships. The Bible emphasizes love for God, and then next, love for people. Jesus at one time was asked by his disciples, because there were so many laws, regulations, commandments. In fact, every rabbi that you would sit up under, if he would think of a new law, he would just tack God's name on it and say, "This is now our new law that we're following." And so Jesus was considered a rabbi, a teacher, and the disciples wanted to know, so what's our greatest commandment? They thought maybe it would be, pray 5 times a day or make sure you give this amount of money. And what Jesus told them was so out of the ordinary. He said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. But he didn't just stop there. We know those religious people, right? They really love God, but it doesn't seem to transfer to people. In that same commandment, he said, and love your neighbor, but he's not finished, as you love yourself. An important part of that verse there is as you love yourself. So if we want to be able to love other people the way that God wants us to love them and the way they deserve to be loved, it starts with us. We have to learn how to be compassionate to ourselves. Otherwise, we have no compassion for anybody else. We need to be able to forgive ourselves. Otherwise, we're the ones that's going to hang on to stuff forever and never be able to forgive and be set free. We need to be able to be patient with ourselves if we're going to be able to let other people grow and thrive. So it starts with us. And it starts with us actually listening to ourselves and what we're saying. Listening to which force that comes from. Is what's being told to you something that a loving father would tell you with maybe tough love? Or is it something that's just making you feel lousy about yourself with no solution? Pay attention to what voice that you're listening to, because one's going to take you down the wrong track. The other is going to lead you home where you belong. In my other job, I'm a massage therapist. And I can't tell you how many clients that I have that it's the first time that they knew what it felt like for their body to relax. And then I have ones that, man, I can give all kinds of pressure and they never cry uncle because they're so disconnected to their body that if the body says pain, they just keep plowing through. But they keep plowing through at their own detriment because they're not stopping to listen to the body saying, hey, I think maybe you should get somebody to help you lift that piano rather than being stubborn and no, I can do it myself and keep pushing and pushing. So we so often even disconnect with our own body. So it's time to get to know yourself. It's time to be on your side. And how do we do that? We listen to our body. Our body is telling us all the time what it needs. We just choose not to listen. And then our poor body, we get upset with it when it doesn't work right. All of a sudden, now we're really against our body. But if you'll get in tune to listen to your body, it will give you a long and productive life if you work with it. The same way goes with God. We have to become in tune with Him to hear what He's saying to us. The Bible emphasizes listening a lot. And if you're going to have a good relationship, you got to learn to listen. To improve all of your relationships, we need to become good listeners. We need to listen to what is said and what's not said. Sometimes hesitation or silence screams louder than any word that you could vocalize. Silence speaks much louder than words sometimes. I don't want you to raise your hand, but I do want you to ask yourself, do you consider yourself to be a good listener? And if you didn't even hear what I asked, ask your neighbor that hopefully is a good listener. What did she just say? We all have areas that we can improve on in this because life, it's about relationship. And if we're going to have a relationship, we have to learn how to relate. And then we've got to communicate. James, the half-brother of Jesus, was not always a believer until after the resurrection. Then hands down, he knew without a doubt, this the one that I used to wrestle with, the one that I made fun of, the one that I teased, the one that I tripped, the one that I hid his stuff, the one that we fought over the food. That's my Messiah. And James was very wise. He wrote a lot of really good things in the Bible. And he became one of the leaders of the New Testament church that was forming. And he was training people. And he was writing about relationships. And so I want to read in James, verse 1, 19, and 20. And he's saying, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God's desired." Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So many arguments occur because while there was communication, something was lost in the translation. We hear sometimes with a preconceived dialogue, or we even put our words in the other person's mouth because of a prior conversation or things in our past. When you're communicating with people and you want to develop a relationship, it's good to know a little bit about their past. It will help you communicate with them better. And we have to be careful if we are the one that is always looking to be left out or victimized or put down. We have to be careful to not put our spin and our twist to those words, because then it becomes something completely different, and then miscommunication happens in so many arguments. Have you not been in the situation where, luckily it was a mature enough person, came to you and said, "Hey, when you said such and such, that really upset me." And how nice it is when, especially if they're completely off kilter, you can say, "Oh, that's not what I said at all," or "That's not what I meant at all." And then it's solved because there was then the correct communication. So try to take people at their face value when they're talking. Don't put your emotional baggage and shove it into their mouth and then have it be discolored if you want to grow in your relationships. We do the same thing, believe it or not, with God. We look for those loopholes. And we'll even tempt him by saying, "Hey, God, I really feel like partying, so stop me if not," as you're already sitting down with a bottle in your hand, because we're listening for that loophole of, "Oh, didn't hear anything, might as well go ahead and take that drink." Or, "God, I really think you're telling me to do such and such," and we will put words into his mouth. So when we say that we want to listen, we got to open up our heart and actually hear what he says, and then see what you feel. Listen to your emotions. So just like we want people to listen to us and not take things out of context, let's give them that same benefit. Because what happens if we don't, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and we're missing out on maybe some really good relationships. But we can't get out of our head. We already start putting things into their mouth before they even say it. So ask God, open my ears. Open my ears to what they're saying. If we do this, our relationships will be so much better. So what I want to do is I want to help you this morning. If you don't know where you are and which side of the fence you're on, we're going to talk about some habits or characteristics of a poor listener, and then we're going to talk about some of a good listener. There's a lot of proverbs in the Bible that speak about listening. If someone is talking to you, then rather than listening to reply, maybe listen thinking of a question to ask them when they're finished. That way you're still keeping the focus on them. If they're telling you about an experience, don't automatically start thinking about your experience. because now you've only heard a part of their story. Ask them something to continue on. Well, how did that make you feel? If it's something that's wonderful that's happened in their life, say, that is wonderful. Have you told anybody else about it? Or what are you going to do with that experience now? That way you're fully engaged. If we ask God, use me to help others, it has to start with listening. Listening to what they say, listen to what they don't say, pay attention to their body language, pay attention to the tone of their voice. Text messages can be wonderful, and they can also be awful. Because whatever mood you're in, you're going to put that right into that. I've had people read me back a text message, and they put all kinds of emotions and inflections in that. Whereas if I wouldn't know the situation, I would read it, and it just sounded like a regular reply. So text messages, they can kind of shoot you in the foot. So if a text message is not going a good place, my suggestion is, let's talk about this when we can get together. In other words, I like to have eyeball conversations, meaning I like to see your eyes when I talk to you. I want to see if you're still there with me. And if you want to be used by God in a way that can really help people, people say, well, what area should I work on? Work on listening. When you show somebody that you listen, you show them that you care. You show them that they mean something to you. You show them that they are a priority instead of your phone or your book or whatever it is. You go, yeah, I'm listening, as you're still looking at something else. You may be listening, but it's not 100%. When somebody puts down something and they look me in the face, eye to eye, when I'm speaking, that really means a lot. That says it matters what I'm saying. You're listening to me. What I love is we don't have to ever tell God to put down his phone or quit working on that war over there. God says, when you call to me, I'm going to listen. My father, having ADD, was very hard sometimes to keep him on track with a conversation. And I get that because I struggle with that too. And I remember being younger, and I would ask him a question, wanting him to put down the newspaper, and he would be talking, but I knew that he was also reading. And I would put the newspaper down with my little hands, and I would put my hands on each side of his face, and I would touch nose to nose and eye to eye, and I say, Daddy, listen to me. And I had his full attention. Well, even as a child, I knew that that made me feel heard and special if somebody listened. Same way with God. We say, God, speak to us, but then do we ever stop long enough to actually listen? It sounds kind of strange, and maybe my relationship with God is strange. Everybody has their own individual relationship. And not that I will actually hear his voice per se, but I can get a feeling, and some thoughts will come into my mind. And I've asked him before, how was your day? Did somebody make your heart happy today? Did somebody make your heart sad today? Is there anybody you want me to pray for today? See, that's a relationship. And that draws me closer to him. Yeah, he's God. And yeah, he can handle everything. But he still wants to be listened to. To listen is to love. So a poor listener will presume what somebody is saying instead of what they're really saying. And also a poor listener will already start thinking about what they want to say back, so they can't wait for you to hurry up and shut up so that they can say their part. So then sometimes they miss out on even where the conversation is going. If you want to be listened to, make sure that you listen to others. It's really strange and a lot of people get so caught up that they don't even notice that. So I guess I'm going to say something. So if that is you and you notice, then maybe you can work on it to have a better relationship, and it will make your relationships and your heart happier. But I've known people for years And every conversation evolves around what's going on in their life. Every single one. There's never been a, hey, how are you? It's been a, hey, I need to tell you blah, 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 and then would you pray, and then blah, 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 and then the conversation is over. That may be a good talker. That's not a good listener. And if you really want God to use you, then it says that we should listen twice as much as we talk. 2 ears, 1 mouth. I think he gave us a little bit of a clue. He could have made more mouths, but he decided, no, one's going to be enough. But we need to give them an ear on either side so it will double their chances of hearing what's being said. So we presume too much, and too much we will listen to the first few words and then we make our own assumption about the rest. And I'm guilty of this. Maybe you can join me in this group. A really slow talker trying to come up with the right word will make me want to jump in and help them. And what's really bad is they're like, no, and even if it is the right word, it still didn't matter because they still hem-hawed the rest of the conversation. So that's an area that I have to work on because it's really, really hard. It's really hard not to just pick it up and help this person to get through. But if I have asked God to help other people, I have to listen to what they say. I can't just assume what that conversation is going to be. So I have to work on that area, and I'm really, really trying. So I don't want you to think just because I'm up here preaching that I've got it all 100%. I talk to myself just as much as I talk to you. And in fact, I hear it twice. I hear it the first time, and then I hear it when I'm speaking it again. So the next one that I want to read is Proverbs 18:13. And it says, I love this, to answer before listening, that is folly, in other words, silliness, and shame. And sometimes you'll embarrass yourself if you start answering before they've even let them finish the statement. I'm working on that one as well. To help you listen better, instead of thinking about your response, like I said, think about what they're saying. You can really help become a more sympathetic and compassionate person if you will put yourself in their shoes as they're talking. Rather than saying, oh, that was horrible what you did, maybe stop and think what led them to that place to do that. And then if they are telling you, actually take it as a compliment, meaning that they trusted you enough to tell you something that is deeply hurtful in their soul. And you'll start to have compassion, you'll start to have understanding, and that makes an even better listener. Ask questions. We are so quick to shut down something. If a child would say, you don't love me, we're so quick to say, oh, I give you a roof over your head, there's food on the table, I tell you every single day that I love you. You're not listening. You're hearing words, but you're not listening where they're coming from. The question should be, why do you think that? Let them tell you what spurred that to come out of their mouth. They might say things in haste of, I hate you. And instead we're like, you don't ever tell me you hate me. And then here we go again. And we've completely missed an opportunity to help that relationship grow of, why do you feel like that? If you'll stop and ask some questions. I had a little one in Sunday school one time come in and he said, we're moving. And another adult quickly said, oh, that's so exciting. But they didn't look at his little face. And so the question should have been, how do you feel about that? Because kids they might be busy doing something, they might just drop a real strange statement. Don't just let it go. They drop that statement for a reason. Ask them a question about the statement and then listen to what they have to say. Because the child that screams out, "You don't love me," for them, that's their truth. May not be your truth, but in that moment, that's their truth. And if we just shut it down and tell them to shut up, and then now they feel bad about saying anything, we've missed an opportunity to help them grow and to help build our relationship together. So ask questions. Don't just shut them down because what they said was rude. Ask them a question. Get to the real meaning behind it. Most people that are hateful to other people, it's because they're hateful to themselves. Most people that are unhappy with everybody, they're unhappy with themselves. So back to the verse, love your neighbor as you love yourself. The key, learn to love yourself. So being a lousy listener is just jumping to a conclusion. Jesus, if you'll notice him in the Bible, he asks a lot of questions. Isn't that funny? The one that knows everything is going to ask a question. Why would he do that? Because it's a relationship. And he wants to hear from you. You might say, well, he already knows everything about me. Yeah, but not in your words and not your voice. Have you ever had an experience and you've got the one storyteller in the group, and when somebody asks you and that storyteller's there and they had the same experience as you, you'll say, tell them what happened. Tell them the story. Because they have a way of just bringing you right to it. They are animated and it's going to feel like you were just right there. God wants to hear you tell your story. He already knows everything, but it's a relationship. He wants to hear from you. So Jesus, he asks a lot of questions because to listen is to love. The other trademark of a lousy listener, they are impatient. I'm working on it. How can you tell? They often interrupt and they often try to finish what you're saying for them. I want to read another verse in Proverbs 29:20. Here we go again. Ouch. Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them. In other words, they have no filter. Things are just coming out of their mouth before they think about what's going to happen to the people when that lands on them. So he says that's a lousy listener, because part of our brain's screaming, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that. Yeah, but that's funny, I'm going to say it. Don't say that, don't say that, don't say that. Yeah, but not everybody around is going to hear, so I can say that. And then you find out everybody around could hear. Take time to think about what comes out of here, because once it's out, man, you can try all the magic in the world, but you can't get it back in. So the Bible says, don't speak in haste. So if we want to relate, we have to communicate, which means we have to listen and not put words in other people's mouths. Lousy listeners are prideful. The wise say, the wiser you are, the better listener you are. Why? Because the wiser you become, the more you know how stupid you actually are. You know that there's so much more to know. So a wise person will actually take time to listen to others, even about a subject that maybe you know something about, to see if they can teach you something even more. It's smart to listen. So if you're younger and somebody has outlived you by quite a few years, don't just think, oh, they're old, they're senile. No, they've got so much more experience. Maybe listen to what they have to say and see if it can help you avoid some knotholes and some potholes in life. So a lousy listener will just have a conversation so they can hear their self-talk and impress everybody around with all of their wisdom and their knowledge. What happens with that is when you leave that conversation, you haven't gained anything. You already knew everything you were going to say. You'd learned nothing new. So see what you can learn in conversations. See how people can help you in conversations. So lousy listeners, they already think that they already know everything on the subject and don't need to be told anything new. We can learn from anyone, even people we disagree with. People that I disagree with like 1,000,000%, I don't just tell them, no, that's wrong, I don't agree with that. I listen to their viewpoint, their perspective. Because if later on I am going to be able to show somebody the truth, I need to know where they're coming from to be able to relate to them. So just because you disagree, don't discount it. Listen to their opinion. Maybe ask them questions. Find out where they're coming from, and then God can use you maybe to be a bright light. That's why I loved so much when we were learning about different religions. It's very important to know what different people believe so that you don't automatically step on their toes right at the get-go. How are you going to ever bring anybody to Christ if you just shut down the communication door right off the bat? Nope, I'm right, you're wrong. That doesn't get you anywhere. But if you listen and you learn, then you're like the wise fisherman. You know where the best fishing spot is. You know what the best bait is. You know when to move and you know when to stay. That's how our relationship should be with one another, especially if we're going to develop them to help Christ. So lousy listeners, they're prideful and they don't listen to others. Proverbs 12:15, it says, "The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice." So again, we can learn from anybody how not to do things and how to do things. I've heard people say, well, I guess I just have to learn it the hard way. That's not being very wise. I told you before, I'm kind of emotionally lazy. So if there's an easy way out, I'm going to look for that one. And so I watch other people's mistakes and I make a note. That didn't work too well for them. Let's try something different. That saved me a lot of spankings. I grew up in the day when you did spank. That saved me a lot of spankings because I would watch other people and my brothers and sisters of what not to do. And it saved me a lot. So do the same. Save yourself some paddlings from God. Find out what not to do by watching people and the consequences they reap from not so smart decisions. I don't want to learn anything the hard way. I want to learn from everybody else's hard way. I know that's lazy, right? But gets me through life a lot easier. So if there's an easier and a faster way, then I'm all ears. Tell me and show me. Lousy listening involves pride. I don't need anyone telling me what I should or shouldn't do. I am my own person. I'll figure it out on my own. There's another Bible verse that handles just that situation, and what it says is pride comes before the fall. Listen to the people that can help you in life. So now we've talked about what being a lousy listener, what that camp is like. And if you want to change your t-shirt, your team t-shirt, let me tell you about qualities of a good listener. Jesus uses us as an example. He tells us that we need to listen with both of our ears and our eyes and our heart. Hear what they say, but notice how they say it. Look at the person who's talking and make eye contact. Let them know that they have your attention. You'll already have a better relationship. Don't you love it when somebody, if I would ask each of you, what friend do you have that's a good listener? You could probably tell me right off the bat. Because, sad to say, you can't find a whole lot of good listeners. Become a good listener. That's a ministry within itself. You don't have to have the answers. In fact, lots of times they're not even looking for an answer. They're just looking for someone to talk to, someone to sit next to them, someone to say, oh, I'm so sorry, that really does stink. Someone to give them a hug, someone to encourage them. So you don't have to be the smartest person. Just be the best listener. You want to pay attention to the person that's speaking to you. When we give them our undivided attention, we're saying, you matter to me. You're important to me. People want to be seen. Just one example from Jesus comes in Mark chapter 10 and 21. I love the first part of this. Jesus looked at him and loved him. And so what he's talking about is there's a gentleman that has done everything right. He's kept the commandments. He goes to the synagogue. He pays his tithes. And so he's like, what else can I do? And so that's when Jesus looked at him, and in loving him, he said, one thing you lack. Go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Jesus, so often in the scriptures we will read, and Jesus looked, and Jesus saw, and Jesus heard, and Jesus asked, and Jesus said. If you love Jesus and not people, that's where you need to start. Ask God, show me how to love your people. Jesus listened. At one point, Jesus actually, it hurt his reputation with some because he would listen to everyone. He would listen to those that people considered were unclean, but he saw a soul. He would party and hang out with, not party as partake in where he was sinning, but he would be with those that were partying. And he would talk with them. And the religious people would say, don't you know what the rules are? Don't you know this is blasphemy? See, Jesus listened not only with his heart, but with his ears and his eyes. At one point, Jesus had asked Matthew, a tax collector, an enemy of the Jews, to come follow him. Oh, and Matthew, that was something he never thought was possible. And he was so excited. He was actually the one that wanted to throw a celebration of this occasion. And so he called all of his buddies around. And he invited Jesus and the disciples. And Jesus was the honored guest. And Jesus was sitting at the table with them. And as he's sitting with the table with them and in the courtyard, you were usually outside of the house where people walking by could see and hear. And we always had the spies watching Jesus just to see if he flubbed up again so we could add that to the reasons why we needed to destroy him. And they said to Jesus, don't you know who you're partying with? Don't you know who you're sitting with? Jesus looked at Matthew, but he spoke to them. Why did he look at Matthew? He looked at Matthew because that was Matthew's biggest nightmare, hearing out loud how he already felt about himself. He couldn't believe the fact that this man, Jesus, that he heard so many things about, even cared about him. And yeah, see here, they're saying exactly how I feel. Jesus, looking at Matthew, spoke to them. And he said, it's the sick who need a doctor. Meaning what that meant to them is that, yes, Matthew, I know that you think that you don't measure up, but I'm the one that can heal. I'm the doctor. See, he took into consideration, he listened not only with his ears, he watched with his eyes and his heart, knowing how Matthew would feel in that conversation. I don't think this would ever happen here at this church, but I'm going to say it out loud because I never want it to happen at this church. Somebody that has messed up and has the guts to come back to church should never hear in the crowd, yeah, don't you know what they've done? They've slipped up again. Look at that. What we need to have is somebody that has the love of Jesus that will look at them with love and address this conversation over here. One of the things that comes to mind so often to me is, but for the grace of God, there go I. That's what Jesus did. Jesus didn't address the religious people with his eyes. Oh, his words were there. But he paid attention with compassion to the one that was broken. Jesus spoke to that whole party there saying, the well don't need a doctor, but the sick do. And he's the doctor. How amazing is that? In other words, he's saying, I'm here with you. So listen with your eyes, your ears, your emotions, and the last one I want to cover is listen with your time. Plan your time around the most important people in your life. Love people with your time. Jesus, in Mark writes, so many times he was interrupted on his way to do something, and they'll say Jesus stopped, or Jesus looked, or Jesus prayed. He was interruptible because he wanted them to know that I will give time to you. You matter. You're worth my time. Jesus made time to listen. Why? Because to listen is to love. Good listeners listen to God. So in closing, here's a few questions that you can ask yourself to see which camp you fall in, the camp of a lousy listener or the camp of a good listener. And if you don't like the camp that you're in, good news is maybe after today and this message, you can trade jerseys. Ask, do I assume what others are thinking before they even open their mouth when they approach me? Do I already jump to a conclusion? Do I already put up a wall? Do I already roll my eyes and go, I'm not going to hear anything they say anyway? Do I assume what others are thinking? Am I a patient listener? Am I open to advice? Or is it just a one-way conversation? And do I listen with my eyes, with my heart, with my emotion, and with my time? See, everything that God wants to do in your life, in my life, is relational. Why? Because to listen is to love. Thank God that any time that you pray, He always listens. Our prayer can be, help us to listen like Jesus listened. Help me to listen with my eyes, my ears, my time, because to listen is to love. God bless you.